Bring it down to 10 seconds. Normally he has a cut down, and then he turns on the camera when it goes.
Just from the show opening ahead, right?
Just a second. Yeah, just a few seconds. Hello and welcome to People's View, and welcome Lori Ortolano, who's been here before talking about the assessment and everything in the city, and we're going to talk about it again a little bit. And could you just give us a little quick summary where the whole thing stands?
Sure. There's been some changes made, and we've people in the city might know we have a director of administrative services now who is running the assessing department. But the city has changed course a little bit and has posted a job description for a chief assessor, which I think is vitally important for a city this size to have a manager of assessing.
A professional who knows about it.
Exactly, because we don't have that right now, and it's a big issue. So we're looking for a new chief for our assessing office, and the city is getting ready to start phase 1 of a measure and list to try and get better data on the property record cards for all of the properties in Nashua. That's a 3-year initiative. And the Board of Tax and Land Appeal gave their ruling in October that they were going to keep the docket open and monitor the city over the next 4 years as they go through the process of revaluing the property. The city is responsible for providing a quarterly update to the Board of Tax and Land Appeal, and they're hoping, I think, to work with us down here to create more transparency and fix some of the problems that citizens brought up there to address with them.
Okay, so the state really gotten into it. They are concerned about the running of the assessment board?
Definitely.
Okay.
So that was a good thing, because this obviously the city wanted the docket closed. Nobody wants the state in their business, but I think that the state needed to be in this business.
Good.
And because it wasn't being run well.
Well, you generated a 60-page or plus report on all the things that you found, and doing it a lot on your own money to hire somebody to watch what was happening.
Yes, and I'm really thankful that the board, the Board of Tax and Land Appeal, gave me and another resident the opportunity to go to the table and present the amount of information we had. The real difficulty has been that the city does not seem to want to take any responsibility for what the data shows, and that continues to be a really difficult problem. They asked for a 2-month extension after the hearing to put in a response to the submittal by the taxpayers. And when that response went in at the end of October and I looked at it, it was really disappointing because they were not willing to give an inch that there were some significant issues here in Nashua. That leaves a pretty big divide on how you come together and fix the problems when the city is still throwing their hands up in the air saying there really aren't any. It's just a few people making waves and everything's pretty good. So, I feel somewhat vindicated because at least the state is saying we're going to stay involved. And the DRA still has the PA 71s open, which are submittals of formal complaints by citizens to review specific assessors, because the Department of Revenue Administration is the oversight body for all certified assessors. So they're still looking into some of the civil service issues and ethical issues that we've addressed with them.
Yeah, you brought up a couple that were kind of serious about one of the assessors and falling asleep someplace, and then also putting in unsubstantiated changes in some values of that were the
Assessments, yeah. This individual definitely has been on my radar, and it didn't come because I was targeting the individual. I was looking at the property record cards.
Right.
And then I started seeing a pattern.
Right.
I looked at a lot of cards,
Yeah.
several thousand cards, and I started recognizing a pattern in an individual that just wasn't capturing the data the way I felt the data should be captured. Then I started getting concerned that they were not in the office often or would sign out for very long periods of time. And I went up in October and pulled all the mileage logs, not even last October, the one before, 2018. And I pulled all the mileage logs on this individual. And I pulled them on the other assessors too, so I could get a comparative feel for what's typically charged. And I found what looked like a pretty big red flag and discrepancy. And then the CFO got involved. I talked to him and I said, I think you have a fraud problem going on here and you ought to look into it. And he said, thank you, I'll get back to you. And I never heard from him again. And so it's interesting because through a series of right to knows, I was able to get emails between the former chief and the CFO. And it was super hard to get these emails. I mean, the city sent them to me in scrambled batches. So when you think you would get your emails sequentially dated, they were all scrambled over a 6-month period.
Wanted to help you out.
They wanted to, and there ought to be a law that doesn't allow that to happen, that they can't scramble them.
Yeah.
Or when I tried to ask the city why they were scrambled, well, that's not a right to know question because you're not asking for a specific document, right? You're asking a general question, so they refused to answer that. So I would like to try and understand why we can't get them sequentially. But when I ended up getting these emails, I put them together, and I found that, in fact, the CFO mentions that to Mr. Duhamel that Lori's coming up to the financial office to look at these mileage reimbursement forms today, and that was on the 26th of October. During my meeting with her, she stated that appraisers seem to be aimlessly wandering the streets of Nashua. If we do not keep a log on which taxpayers we visit, it's a good idea to start. Outlook calendar may work. I'm open to anything. Let me know your thoughts. He sent this to the former chief. The chief writes back, I told our assessors they no longer have to do those logs because I thought they were silly.
Oh boy.
So I chuckled when I saw that because this individual was not doing the logs. Now, this kind of concern spun itself up into something more significant, which led to me going to the police, except that myself and several other citizens went to the Attorney General's office first. We worked with an investigator up there and we explained what was going on. And after several weeks, the investigator said, I really want you to push this into the Nashua office. I was really hesitant to do that.
Yeah.
It was not a comfortable place for me to be. I was really concerned.
Sure.
That,
The blowback might be significant.
the blowback would be significant, and could they really be impartial?
Right.
Now we have this released report that found no wrongdoing. And what I can't speak to is the specifics of it because all of the data is being held by the police department for redaction. So
Really?
they've put out the conclusion, but we're unable to look at the evidence that was used to create that conclusion. So it leaves me with a limited
Sure.
amount of information from which I can comment, but they did generate an interdepartmental communication that they gave when they announced the release of this mid-January. They had produced this interdepartmental communication on the Nashua Assessing Office investigation. And it's interesting because my attorney had been writing, Rick Lehman had been writing to the Nashua Police Department to follow up on this. And the police said, it's going to take us months more. We're waiting for the DRA to conclude what's going on. They had no information for us. Then all of a sudden we got a call. It's done. And when the Telegraph called me, they said, well, did you get the interdepartmental communication? And of course we did not. That was not for us. So, but what I found interesting in this communication, and it really speaks to the lack of oversight in the assessing office, they concluded that Mr. Turgis, as a salaried employee, Turgis is entitled to his salary regardless of the actual hours he works, as long as he works at some point during a pay period. Now, that almost sounds like they're given flex hours.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what they work, as long as he completes the work that's expected of him. So they don't have to work 40 hours a week.
No.
It says if he comes in and works 2 hours and he goes out to a parking lot and sleeps for 3, that's
all
okay.
right. Yeah.
Because he got his work done. And it said that in speaking with his, the bosses, his supervisors, they confirmed that he was meeting his obligation to get his work done. The problem with that was his supervisor was really not at work. And that's one of the reasons we made the change in the assessing office and eliminated the position, because Mr. Duhamel was not there. So how was he monitoring what this guy was doing? Right. And then when Miss Kleiner came in 3 months before this report started, she had no assessing background at all. How could she confirm what was going on?
Right.
There was no way. So management had no oversight of this.
Right.
But this, as a salaried employee, he's entitled to a salary regardless of the hours he works, as long as he works some point.
I don't think it means that he takes 2 hours a day instead of 8.
Well, here's what's interesting. This investigative review was done in April, which is the busiest assessing month of the year. They had so much work they couldn't even get through it. So how could he possibly put a 2-hour day in or a 3-hour day and have management say, you didn't have anything else to do?
Yeah.
You did great.
Yeah.
Now the union, he's part of the UAW union.
Oh, I see.
And there's a UAW contract, and I pulled that up, the professional contract. For work week and work schedule, the union says the work week consists of 7 consecutive 24-hour periods and shall stay consistent with current practices. The normal work schedule shall consist of 5 consecutive 8-hour work days.
Oh.
So, and then it says the city may establish working hours for jobs having other than normal requirements. This job has normal requirements. It's an 8 to 4 job.
Yeah.
8 to 5. So this says a normal day is 5 days of 8 hours. They say
They don't have any difference between salaried and hourly pay?
they do.
Oh.
This is professionals, and he's
I
part of
see.
the professional unit.
I see. Okay.
And so, but it doesn't, I can't find anything in this contract
That allows them
that says this.
Yeah.
And I had written to Human Resources and asked if there was an addendum, and I was told there was no addendum. I've written to them again, and I've said, and I put this quote in it, and I said, help me find the language in the contract that matches what's being said here.
Right.
Show me where that language is. But that to me is a really concerning practice,
Definitely.
and we need to tighten up.
And it just seems so strange, too, that they allowed the local police to go into looking at this. And, you think just to want to avoid any kind of problem with what it looks like.
Yeah,
you
the
know.
appearance, right?
Yeah, the
Any
appearance.
appearance of conflict of interest or
right.
impropriety. Yes, that was a big concern for me. And When the first article came out in the newspaper, Chief Corrigan mentioned that he went to the mayor to get permission to do this investigation.
Yeah.
And the mayor said, "You're not going to find anything." So that was the first article I read. And what it struck me, and I think I have that correct, why did he need to go to the mayor for permission?
Yeah.
What happened is I reached out to the chief, and I was told I had to compile enough data that was compelling evidence to just show that there was potential wrongdoing.
Right.
So I put together this binder of all kinds of mileage logs, all kinds of information, and submitted it. And they said they were going to take several weeks to review it and let me know if they were going to do an investigation, if it merited one. I received a phone call a couple weeks later. They said, "We're going to open the investigation. The information merits it." But I look back at it now, and I feel it was more of a political game that I got caught in, that I probably should have never gone to them at all. That when I read the newspaper and the mayor gave permission, you're not going to find anything. And then the newer articles that came out when they opened this up
Yeah.
had, like Corrigan said, Mayor Jim Donchis encouraged the police department to investigate. Obviously, we try to maintain an independent view, adding police were mindful of how they interviewed employees while also respecting their rights. You know, what does that really mean? If you feel like you have to be mindful and you try, then maybe you're not the right group to be conducting that investigation. And so what I never saw in the press, in the 3 articles that ran, was the chief saying, you know, this individual presented us with credible information that warranted a review, an investigation.
Yeah.
There was never that acknowledgement, only the initial call that said we're doing it. And I wonder if it was ever really taken seriously.
Well, I can feel the control of the budget had a little bit to do with it.
Yeah, I think it possibly did. And so, and until, the other thing they said, the mileage logs, that they found no wrongdoing in the logs, and they actually ran MapQuest or whatever and looked at his driving route and found that he was actually being conservative. When I looked at his mileage logs, there were months he wasn't doing logs. And in fact, I just read you the email where the logs were canceled.
Right.
So what logs did they look at? If they looked at the one in April where he got caught and he had to shave his mileage down to 40 miles instead of 400, that's what we're talking.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, boy.
So when you got, and then the next month you put in 35, but you keep a few trips off and you look good. That's a different situation. I'm looking at the past.
Right.
And it's interesting because this individual did have a history. And the police said when they interviewed him, he said that sometimes I make mistakes and they get corrected. And, you know, they were picked up that I wrote my mileage down on days that I wasn't at work. You know, my understanding was that was not infrequent. But there was 10 years ago, there was an email that surfaced from the accounts payable supervisor in finance. And she writes to the assessor, "I received your mileage reimbursements for July 2009 to March of 2010. In the future, please be sure to submit your mileage on a weekly or monthly basis." He created 9 months of logs in a day. Okay? And
He had a good memory.
He had a good memory. And then Bob Gagney, who was the deputy assessor for Nashua, who is now the head assessor for the city of Manchester, said, "I have told Greg much the same thing. He has promised to keep current, and I will stay on top of him to do so." I mean, he just wasn't submitting his paperwork correctly. And I don't know if he disclosed that, you know, that I had warnings or I had been, I had some issues. I don't know what got disclosed. But everything in the union contract gets washed away every 2 years. If you have an infraction,
Really?
it only stays on your file
Personnel file. Yeah.
for 2 years. That's short. So he gets you can get away with a lot.
Yeah.
You
And
can have
he's
it
been there a long time, too.
20. He's been there 20 years, and he's the highest level. He got certified as a supervisor by the gentleman who basically was let go. And he did all of his training under him, the 3 years. So that is not a great scenario for us. So, yeah, it's pretty disappointing, and it's hard to find the trust in that office that I think we all deserve at the base level of setting the
definitely.
Valuations.
You do have to see something like that. So what's ahead for you? What do you have coming up? Is there... you going to be watching a little bit more? Are you going to, is the state going to have a review? Or?
Well, the city should have submitted or will be submitting soon the first quarterly review to the Board of Tax and Land Appeal.
Okay.
And we're going to check with the Board of Tax and Land Appeal about getting on the docket. Right now, the way the docket is structured, the communication is between the city and the Board of Tax and Land Appeal. The taxpayers were not put on the docket.
Oh.
We were invited to speak, but we were not a part of the docket. And I would like to try and get us to be part of the docket, have a spokesperson, and I could do that job to represent the taxpayers, because I don't feel the city is being truthful to the Board of Tax and Land Appeal. And when I saw what was submitted in October, it was pretty upsetting. And you can't counter anything.
Yeah.
You can't comment. They don't accept the comments because you're not on the docket. So, and the way the Board of Tax and Land Appeal initiated this was they were reading newspaper articles down here that were largely being initiated by me on all of the problems. And the newspaper articles sort of tipped them off to open this investigation and pull the city up into a hearing. The problem is that that's indirect communication. That's like sending out smoke signals and hoping that somebody sees them and that they're actually written correctly.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes the media doesn't always get it right, and the full story isn't there because you have limited print space.
I agree.
So you've got to have. I would like to see us have a voice in this for the next 3 years. That's more than just smoke signals.
Do you have to go through some legalities to get on the docket? How does that work?
Yes, my attorney is going to help us to speak to them and see if there's any way we can participate in that. And I'm working on a right-to-know lawsuit right now because there's been so many difficulties in getting information out of the assessing office. They denied a lot. One of the big things is they put video cameras in the assessing office.
Oh, really?
So when the private eye investigation was done in April of last year, there's a whiteboard that was up in the assessing office that the assessors sign out on to show they're going out in the field to do work or they're going out to lunch. And it gives a time and a time back. This gentleman would sign out field work, but my PI was following him and he wasn't going to any homes. He was driving to the parking lot, driving around a little bit, driving to the parking lot, hanging out for 2.5 hours, driving back to City Hall. He, in fact, was not going to any properties. So he was not truthful on this whiteboard. And the whiteboard I photographed pictures of the whiteboard, sent it to my PI to say, here's what's happening today. He's on the whiteboard, follow him. So it became a tool. Well, after the report got released, I'm going to say 2 weeks later, they ripped the whiteboard off the wall, right? It was almost like a middle school thing. Whiteboard comes down. The next day, Carl, a camera goes up in the ceiling. So, and then I was like, oh, I'm being watched, when I go in. Well, I was getting some right-to-know requests, and they turned out to be treating me, I felt, very unfairly. They would not service me. When I'd go to the counter to get a file, they would say, no, you come back later. And I would stay in there and watch other people come through the door, and they would give them their files. They wouldn't give me a file. I'd have to leave, but they would service the other people who walked in. So a couple times when that happened to me, I literally made a log, and I went back and wrote a right-to-know for the video. I want the video. I want to see this and put it into a case that I'm being discriminated against. Well, it took like 4 months of waiting with the city, and finally in December, they denied the videos. They're private information. Even though they're in a public area and they're videoing the public, you're not allowed to have them. So we're going after those videos. Yeah. And Jan Schmidt, who's an alderwoman, was out blogging that the videos contain audio, that we can't let them out because they're audio recordings. Well, it's illegal to audio record in a public area
Right.
unless there's notice. So the question is, were they audio recording us and we didn't know? And now we can't get these things. So that's one of the pieces we're going after.
Oh,
Redactions.
interesting.
You know,
Yeah.
you saw that redaction sheet I took
Right.
to the board meeting.
Yeah.
We're going after information like that that's been fully concealed for totally unknown reasons.
Uh-huh.
And I feel that the city is not being transparent. They're
And
not.
you know that you have to run a business. I mean, so, in a business-like way, and they have to check on your operation periodically.
Of course.
The audit reports, they have no audit reports, or how does?
You know, I have pushed and I have started to get audit reports. So I found out the software produces audit reports. I got the software manual and I read the whole manual on Assess Pro to learn what the reporting capabilities were. This software is very powerful and it has terrific reporting capabilities. Nobody was looking at the reports for the last 5 years that I can tell. So there's no oversight going
Right,
on.
right.
And this whole police thing boils down, I think what they should have been able to conclude, and it should have been the headline, is there's been no management oversight in this office and in part of City Hall.
Right.
And that lack of management oversight is what led to these potential issues that maybe you can't find the criminal wrongdoing because it's hard to do that. It doesn't mean it didn't happen, but there is a complete lack of accountability and management oversight in that office. And I don't know if they've had anyone apply for the chief position, but I you know, it's a messy situation down here. But we really need somebody talented who is going to push the mayor and other people out of that office. Tell them, go.
Yeah.
It's not your space.
I think they really line up people before they open positions too.
Well, you know
So-
what my motto is for city hiring?
What?
The less you know, the higher you go.
Yeah, right.
And that's what they do. The resume doesn't really matter, and the promote from within is the way it's done.
You know, I can't talk about the current legislation up there or the administration of the state offices, but while I was in Public Works and looked at some of the different committees up there, they get audit reports. They have a very good audit system. Not very many of them follow up on it.
Yeah.
There are audit, not just the money part, but just operational, where they have faults on it, and they're very professional, and they just ignore it. So somebody has to follow up on it.
Well, and when the state comes down and does the audit, they produce records of
Yeah.
improper properties. What I've discovered is our city never corrects them. So the audit is
That's
never
what happens.
used.
That's right. That's
I
exactly
just
what
discovered
happens.
that in the last month.
Well, I would wonder what's happening on the state end too, whether they're keeping their records right.
Right.
Because one of the big ones is the Health and Human Services. They have things going back 5-6 years that haven't been changed.
Yeah. Yeah. The changes don't get made,
Right.
and that's frustrating.
It is.
It's not good for assessing because you do not get to equity or fairness when you're not keeping your data accurate and you're not maintaining the integrity of your systems.
Well, you ready for the state too?
Yeah, I know. That's
Well,
the next thing.
We need more people like you going out after this and not being afraid of feedback or blowback or whatever you want to call it. And I hope to have you back again.
I'd love to come
Find
back.
out,
There's
and,
plenty of topics, let me tell you.
oh yeah, the school, what they're doing with the school, and what they're going to do with Elm Street with it.
Right.
You know, they have a beautiful auditorium there. That might be a place to save for the thing instead of building something new.
Right.
No.
Yes, for sure.
So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.